Good morning. It's an early morning, Wednesday. It's beautiful outside, and I want to thank you for coming today to join Metropolitan Community College in the first presentation of our 15th annual Diversity Matters Film and Lecture Series. This lecture actually will be a performance, and there'll be ample commentary provided also. Today, I would like to remind you that the participants are silenced. If you have questions, we want to hear them, but send them to the chat. We will take care of your questions towards the end of the presentation, but also be watching in case you're having any challenges. I want to remind you that at the end of the performance, you'll have an opportunity to evaluate this online, and throughout the year we're going to be giving prizes to attendees for their continued participation in our series. So I hope that you can take care of that. I will put in the chat the address for the online evaluation, but it also will be on a slide at the very end of the program. So as a reminder, this is a really important year. It's an election year, and Metro wanted to make sure that we brought to you information about the history of voting and how you are to have the opportunity to vote. In 2020, it has been the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, and I will allow our next speaker to share a little of that with you. We often receive references for presenters from around the community, and Dr. Amy Force, who teaches history at Metropolitan Community College, wanted us to bring in today's presentation. So I'd like to turn the screen over to Dr. Amy Force, who will share a little bit about the 100th anniversary, just tell you what that means, and then introduce our speaker. Dr. Force.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Barb. Behind me, I have an image. I'm going to get out of the way here. I have an image of Seneca Falls, New York. And I was there not too long ago. This is where the very first Women's Rights Conference was held in 1848. And ladies wanted to have more rights in the United States. And one of the 9 rights that they asked for was to have the right to vote. And so at this conference, which pretty much everybody in this 300 crowd in Seneca Falls was okay with, when the women brought up the fact that they would like to be able to vote, things got a little bit sticky. And so, you know, this is going to be something that women, it just hadn't even been considered. It was unseemly. It was beneath a woman's dignity to be voting. Politics was seen as a very dirty area that only men could be part of. And so these women are going to sign a Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, and then they are going to attempt to get the vote. They try in various states, they try to get it on the ballot. They have quite a hurdle ahead of them. It is going to take the women 72 years before the Constitution will be amended with the 19th Amendment, which is giving women the right to vote in 1920. It happened, the ratification was put into our Constitution on August 26th. So 100 years ago, all of us who are in the audience who are female, you would have just gotten the right for the very first time to vote, which again, doesn't sound like that big of a deal today because most of us think, oh, you know, we don't know if we'll vote or not. But the truth of the matter is this is the most powerful thing that you can do as an American is to vote. So I strongly urge you, if you are 18 or above, please go ahead and vote in this upcoming election. Women were incarcerated, they were arrested, they were beaten, they were force-fed just because they wanted to get the vote. I have on my pin, this is from the Daughters of the American Revolution. I was given this pin, it says Votes for Women. Notice the color on it is purple, white, and gold. These are the colors of the National Women's Party, which was a pretty militant group of women that are going to be the last women in this very long 72-year stretch to finally get the president, and at that time it was Woodrow Wilson, to get him to get the Congress to go ahead and finally give women the right to vote. So this morning we have a very impressive speaker who's going to be doing all kinds of engaging activities to explain to us who are some of these suffragists. They may be women that you may not have heard of. They may be some of the more famous ones, but let me give you a little bit of information about Kate Campbell Stevenson. She has starred in over 30 Broadway musicals and regional theaters throughout the United States. Some of Kate's favorites are My Fair Lady, Camelot, Showboat, I Do, and The Sound of Music. Kate is a devoted catalyst for women's issues, families, and communities. In 1995, she combined these passions to create a series of one-woman shows called Women Back to the Future, Amending America and Forging Frontiers. Today, her motivational programs are featured nationally in schools, conferences, government programs, and military events. Each performance brings to life powerful women's stories through song, monologue, and clever costume changes to inspire audiences of all ages for a new generation of leaders. Campbell Stevenson was recognized in 2012, 2015, and 2020 as one of Maryland's top 100 women by the Daily Record for her significant professional accomplishments, outstanding community leadership, and inspirational mentoring. Please welcome producer, singer, actor, women's activist, Kate Campbell Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Force, for that wonderful intro. I am so thrilled to be here today. It was 3 years ago that I met Dr. Force on a sidewalk outside a conference in Houston during a fire drill. It wasn't a drill, it was actually a real fire. And we were talking outside on the sidewalk as the firemen were going in and whatever, and we made that connection. So I guess I want to emphasize that you never know where opportunity will be provided for you and your future. So be kind, be friendly, and work together to make wonderful change. I'm thrilled to be here today. I wish I could be there in person because I feel that live theater, there's nothing better than live theater as a motivational tool. I've spent the last 25, 26 years with taking my program around the country. And in an hour or hour and a half time, you can't give the entire history of anything. But what you can do is plant a seed and empower people to understand that women can make a major impact in our world, and that we have the power within ourselves to make a difference in the world. Each one has a special gift, and that it's our job to find out what that gift is. And as students at Metropolitan Community College, that's what you're exploring right now, is you're using your brain, you're using your networking skills to understand and learn how you can make your mark in the world. And without much ado, I would like to jump into the program, and then afterwards, I'll share a little bit more about various women, and then Dr. Force is going to help with the Q&A session. So without any more time, let's jump right into the program. It was the Congressional Union, which was part of NAWSA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And actually what it was is the old guard women, which were basically in the suffrage movement, were basically headquartered in New York. They didn't know what to do with these young women. And so they basically said, okay, well, if you want to make some major changes, you can go down to Washington, D.C. We haven't been very successful. Perhaps you can be, but we can't give you any money. We'll give you about $10. And then you have to raise your own money. Well, these two young women in their 20s, it was Lucy Burns and Alice Paul, went down to Washington, D.C., and boy, did they raise a ruckus. And they were able to raise money to help them. And it was Alice Paul's continued emphasis on visual rhetoric that really helped to make her movement successful. They used newspaper articles, photographs, cartoons. Oh, I have a suffrage cartoon here in the 1915, 16, 17s it was created by Nina Allender, a very, very famous cartoonist, and she used her gifts as a cartoonist doing political cartoons for women, supporting women in the teens, in the 19s. And it really brought to light wonderful, in a wonderful way, the need for women's rights to vote. And this one says 4,000 women voters demand the national franchise of women. And it's a picture of actually Wilson, who would be this donkey, and a suffragist waving her finger at it. Come on, Wilson, we got to get with the program here. We have over 4 million, actually 4 million women voters demanding the national enfranchisement of women. So that was that kind of rhetoric, visual rhetoric, was very, very powerful. And they also had parades and tableaus and women driving across the country in cars. Now, wait a minute. What's so different about that? Well, yeah, today women can drive just about anywhere if they've got a car. But in the 1915, women driving by themselves across the country was unheard of. It was salacious and immoral that women would be traveling unaccompanied by a man. Well, the women said, nuts to that. We're going to travel across the country, and we're going to stop in every town, every small town, stand up, and we're going to say our message about how important it is for women to vote. And those little small town newspapers would take pictures of them and put them in their papers. And that's how they got the message out all the way across the United States. Then later on, they used the silent sentinels. I mentioned it in my show earlier about how women would stand out in front of the White House. Now, today we have, it's happens almost every day that there's a protest in front of the White House. But the silent sentinels were the very first people to protest in front of the White House. And this caused quite a problem for Woodrow Wilson. As a matter of fact, Alice Paul was a thorn in Wilson's side his entire 2 terms in office. She just was relentless and would never give up. That's another thing I liked about her. Instead of, she was taking bold actions, not just tea or visitations to the power brokers, the legislators, or the president. They had been ignored, and that was a tactic that was used by the old guard for decades, and nothing was really happening. So that's why Alice Paul said, we've got to do something different. And they were called militant. Well, they were not militant as we know the word today. Oh, they were just militant in the sense that women spoke out for what they wanted and what they felt they deserved. Let's see here. So what was really cool was planning this suffrage parade. Now, in Washington, D.C., it was just before Wilson's inauguration. Again, another strategic move. They knew that there were going to be thousands and thousands of people in Washington, D.C. to attend Wilson's inauguration. Well, smart move. They co-opted his inauguration, and the day before they had scheduled their parade. And it they knew that this was going to be making a real impact, and it certainly did. I really want to encourage you. I'm not going to tell you the whole story about the parade, but it was very, very effective, but for some unusual reasons. For that, I'll leave that as a tease for you to study more about that suffrage parade. But sadly, that leads me to another part of the suffrage story. Although many suffragists in the 1800s were abolitionists, there were large contingents in the social movement that were racists. Major social and political movements, they're complex, multi-layered, and messy. Today is no exception. The 1913 suffrage parade almost didn't happen because the Southern state suffragists threatened to pull out of the event if African American women were allowed to march with their state delegations. And to save this massive event, Alice Paul agreed with the Southern suffragists that the African American suffragists were to walk at the end of the line. Now, Ida B. Wells Barnett, journalist, educator, suffragist, early leader in the civil rights movement, one of the founders of the NAACP, and one of the most well-known African-American women in our country at the time, was having nothing to do with walking at the back of the parade. She chose a spot waiting on the parade route, and when the Illinois state delegation proudly marched by, she slipped under the rope, which was roping off the streets, and she joined them for the rest of the parade. And she was welcomed and supported by her Illinois delegation. On March 3rd, 2013, I took part in the centennial celebration of the grand 1913 suffrage parade. Approximately 8,000 women from across our country once again gathered at our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., lining up for the parade to begin. I was part of the second group, marching with the National Women's History Project and the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. It was so thrilling to be part of that event. But what was so moving to me, this time, 100 years later than the original, our parade organizers invited the African American women's sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, to lead the parade. Now, they were forced to march at the end of the parade 100 years before. And this time, 100 years later, they were asked to lead the parade. It was a very powerful, meaningful gesture. But over 800 Deltas, dressed in their crimson and cream, with their banners flapping in the cold wind, and boy, it was cold, they lined up to lead the parade. And when it was time to begin, each row upon row of Deltas formed a sea of crimson as they proudly stepped out to lead the 2013 suffrage parade. We've come a long way, but we have much farther to go for equity and inclusion. On a side note, just recently, Ida B. Wells, the investigative journalist, civil rights crusader, and legendary Chicagoan, posthumously received the Pulitzer Prize citation as part of this year's annual awards. It's a testament to Wells' longstanding work and contributions to our country, said Michelle Duster, the great-granddaughter of Wells. The only thing she really had was the truth, noting that Wells' life was not easy and admirers should not minimize what she overcame. And she used journalism as a tool to not just report what was going on, but she used her skill as a journalist to the best of her ability to impact social change. Wells believed that if she could get the truth to the public, she could change attitudes and laws. Duster said, so she had a very specific purpose for her journalism. And it's amazing what she did is appreciated today. Indeed, truth. We need more of it. What a tremendous role model she was and continues to be today. Now, the other person I'd like to talk about is a little bit more about Sojourner Truth. I'd like to clarify a few things about her life. She was born Isabella Baumfree, AKA Sojourner Truth later on. She was born enslaved on a Dutch farm in upstate New York, 75 miles from New York City. Now, we don't normally think of slaves being in the northern part, or enslaved people being in the northern part of our country, but they were. In 1797, that's what was a normal practice. Isabella's first language was Dutch. She spoke it exclusively for her first 9 years until she was sold to farmers several times. In the next 3 years, she was sold over and over again as a child. She had a very difficult life. Finally, in her late 20s, she escaped. She ran away with her baby daughter and found safety with another Dutch family, the Van Wagenens, in New Paltz, New York. Now, Isabella was a very, very strong, tall, imposing woman. She was slender, very strong, and she had a deep, deep voice. She learned to speak out against slavery and for the women's right to vote. But with her unusual looks and her powerful voice, she became in great demand for women's suffrage conventions and for the abolitionist events. And what was amazing about her story is that she used these small calling cards with a picture on it of herself saying, I sell the shadow to finance the message. And so she was it was like social media, but in the mid 1800s. And that's how she supported herself, selling them for pennies. That added up. She was in such great demand and helped support herself in her suffrage and abolitionist movement. And also about her speech that I chose to do part of, that she gave in the Ohio meeting in 1851. Now, Isabella, Sojourner Truth, she was illiterate. She didn't read or she didn't write. So when she was doing her speeches, they would be recorded by reporters and friends. And they would be, many of the times, they would be different versions of her speeches. Some say they never heard her say, "Ain't I a woman?" But I decided to go with that because, first of all, it's great theater. But second of all, I don't doubt that whatever she was saying was all about, I am a woman. Why am I not given these rights? And all of this, she was talking about how she could gather in the crops and she was strong as a man, were definitely true. So I decided to go with that speech, but there's no doubt in my mind that the sentiment that whatever she said was correct. And she actually recorded, she dictated her narrative, her story, and that was printed out by William Lloyd Garrison, who was a famous abolitionist, and he printed that for her, and she sold that as well, her story, to support herself. She truly made a difference, and she's probably one of the most well-known suffragists from that era. Now I would like to turn it back to Dr. Forrest, and she can ask some of the questions that you put forth, and we'll take it from there. You need to unmute, Amy.
Okay, got it. All right. First of all, awesome performance. Yay! I wish we could unmute everybody so you could hear the clapping, because I actually was clapping during your performance. There was that one part with Harry Byrne that, yeah, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. That was awesome. I've got a raft of questions. I know we don't have too much time, but if anyone else wants to put in questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. So I'm going to start. This is from Ryan, and he said, why did it take so long for women to get the right to vote?
Well, first of all, they had to convince men, because men were in power. Men were all the elected officials. And they weren't so, whenever somebody has to give up power or share power, it takes a little bit of a fight. And it was a long time in coming to convince them that their power, that the world would not be diminished if women had their say. It would impact, it would be a positive thing for the world, for our country to do so. But that's why it took so long. Men were in power.
Yeah. I can't even imagine today women needing a right, and the only one who could vote was a man. So yeah. you're at their mercy.
Yep.
Okay. Marta said, and this was a really good question. She said, is it true that the vote was granted to white women and black men? And I think she's saying, was it only the white women, or did the black women actually get the vote too?
Well, actually, it was technically everybody, but in reality, the African-American women did not get the vote until, because of all the Jim Crow laws and so on. Actually, they suppressed even African-American men from voting. The Chinese American women and the African-American women, Native American women did not get the vote until much later, when other laws were passed to make it happen. I think I'll mention more about that in my closing remarks. But it's infuriating when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. You know, we usually celebrate, oh, you know, we've got the vote, but you're right. Black women trying to access the ballot box were violently kept away. Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question I have is, I'm curious, because I'm an Alice Paul fan as well. Why did you focus on Alice Paul? And I'm curious, if you could go back in time, what would you ask her today?
Well, she had so much focus. I was so impressed with her about that. What would I ask her? I think I would ask her, why didn't you stand up more for all women, for the African-American women? I was a fan of Alice Paul because she had such guts. Tiny woman, she would not give up. I mean, she's one of the main people who were force-fed, but she had such conviction about right in most ways, but that she didn't include the African-American women and all women in that vote. I think that's what I would ask her about, because I was really devastated when I found out about that in my research. And yet I think she was so focused on it that she thought, we have to get the vote, we have to get this vote passed, no matter what. And then we'll deal with the rest later. So.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, yeah, she is a product of her time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's fighting against a lot. Okay. Do we have time for 2 more questions?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, great. All right. Brittany wants to know, or Britton wants to know, what strategies did women use to win the right to vote, and which one was the most successful?
Well, like all strategies, when you first try them, many times they work, but then they kind of people figure out a way to get around them. And so when the petitions and the parades didn't work, they lost their kind of zing. They had to up, like I said in the show, they had to up the ante and raise the risk. And I think the most effective ones were when they started to truly embarrass Woodrow Wilson using his own words against himself. You know, how he was off saving the world for democracy when 50% of our population, we didn't have the vote. So that was really fraudulent. And then I really think that when she started really attacking, or when they started really showing the hypocrisy about what Wilson was doing, that was raised the ante enough to get more attention. And then when the women were imprisoned, it really, I mean, they broke no laws. This was totally illegal what happened to them. And I think actually it was some senators' daughters and wives that were also imprisoned. So this kind of said, no, this isn't right. And I think that started to get the attention of more people to finally have the nerve to stand up and say, we need to do this. And really, he didn't change, he was forced to change his mind. He was always against women's rights. I mean, even as a professor in college, he was not thrilled that women were even getting educated. So, you know, he had a long history of tamping women down. So anyway, that's part of my reasoning.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Kevin made an observation and then he has a question for you. He said, at the time period, there were women who helped with the farm work, which was a job that obviously involved lots of dirt. How come politics were seen as too dirty for a woman?
Good question. Well, I think we're living with, at that time, men were using the excuse that, oh, women were too fragile. They were being held on this pedestal. Actually, that comes from colonial, you know, from our history back in Britain, where women were supposed to be up on a pedestal. And ever since the beginning of our country, women have been diving in and doing equal work, just not being recognized for it. Really hard work, working alongside the men in the farms and in the communities. So it really was a ridiculous reasoning that women weren't, weren't capable. It was really a false thing. Again, it was another way for men to perpetrate this ideal that women, now not all, even some women, there were the antis, which were the anti-suffragists, included women, because they were afraid their lifestyle might be diminished a little bit. But the majority of women were out there working, making things happen, whether they were working in the home with the family or in the fields. Now that's why Harry Byrne changed his vote, because his mother, Feb Byrne, first of all, she was a teacher when she was younger. And then when her husband died, she had to take over the farm. And Harry saw how hard his mother worked. And she deserved to have a say. I mean, she paid taxes. I mean, she deserved to have a say in our government. And when she said, please support the women, he did. And that, I mean, he couldn't in all good conscience. He was thinking of his mother. But thank heavens, Feb Byrne wrote that letter, because it changed the course of history.
Yes, it did. Good thing. You should always listen to your mother. And I think that kind of answers Logan's question, because he was asking, why did women think they even had the right to ask for the vote? So I think, or do you want to add to that?
They wanted to have a say, and the whole idea that we're less than a man, as they didn't accept it. But the women kept trying to the men kept trying to convince them, oh, they didn't need to do this. They'll be taken care of. But when their issues and when their interests were not being represented, That's when women said, wait a minute, we don't own our own children. We can't own our own land. We can't even speak out in public until the middle of the 1800s. If a woman wanted to, she had to speak through her husband, her son even, if she wanted to express her opinions in public. Now that's ridiculous. We have too much to say to wait for them.
Yes. Okay, my last question. This one's a doozy. Think about this.
Okay.
This one's from Wyatt. And he said, what would you have done if you had lived back then to make a difference for women?
Well, I suppose I would have been right there with the suffragists because I come from a family of activists. Just what's right. And, I think young children from the time they're 3rd and 4th grade, some of their biggest thoughts are, well, that's just not fair. And I think that I would be speaking out too. I either that or dead, because somebody might kill me for my speaking out. But I just think that it's just so important to own your power. I think so for decades, for centuries, women have given away their power and let other people usurp it. And no, we are powerful people. We have our own thoughts. We have a right to express ourselves. And that's why it is so important to nurture yourself, study some of these people who can inspire you to figure out what it is your gifts are. And learn, here you're at the university, educate yourself to your finest potential. So we can go out there and make a difference, no matter if you're a man or a woman, that you have the right and the power within yourself to truly make a difference in the world.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Very powerful thought. I know you said you had a few last minute.
I do have a few things. This vote is coming up and it's really important, no matter what side of the politics you're on, that you become an educated voter. This is the 100th anniversary of women winning the vote. It's important. And we've come a long, long way. I mean, right now we've got Senator Kamala Harris, who is African-American and Asian American. And she is on the ticket for vice president, which 100 years ago would be unthinkable. Now we're celebrating her nomination, but it doesn't diminish the flagship efforts of, say, Geraldine Ferraro in the 80s, or Sarah Palin's nomination in 2008, or the boldness of Shirley Chisholm and Hillary Clinton's run for our country's highest offer. Rather, it demonstrates women's ascension into the political arena. And we don't have to wait to be older to make a difference in politics. We can use our voices now through voting and becoming active on committees and running for office. It's just something that I'm so excited about, this younger generations coming in. And I've learned over the years that it's when the older guard and the young people come together, it's when real social change happens. In every major movement in the United States, that's where the change happened. So please do not shy away from becoming involved. You can make a difference. I know we're getting a little short on time here, but let's see. Right now, we have opportunities. There are people of all colors and all backgrounds and ethnicities. You can step up as well to help be leaders in your community. And with the emergence of women of all races, religions, and ethnicities being elected to public office, it's a great example of how our constitutional amendments work to create a society that's inclusive for all. And don't let anybody tell you you can't do anything. If you feel very, very motivated and you have the education and the background of facts and truth behind you, you speak out. Use your power to make a difference. I want to thank Dr. Force for your help today and suggesting I bring my show to MCC, and to Barbara Velasquez for the many months of support in making it happen. Now, I'm gonna have a closing song, Standing on the Shoulders, and it's written by a colleague of mine, Joyce Johnson Rouse. Today, we stand on the shoulders of great women, some well-known, yet most unsung heroines who worked tirelessly to promote women's equality and women's votes. The best way we can honor them is to educate ourselves on the issues, find our voice, and vote.